Right. Good afternoon to everyone who is already joining us. I'm Heather, the Operations Director with the Cyber Guild. Just to let you all know, we're going to give a couple minutes for people to be able to join us. So feel free to hang out, drop an intro in the chat. Our panelists are here with us, and we're very excited to get the conversation kicked off. So we will go ahead and get started very soon. But in the meantime, feel free to chat amongst yourselves, and welcome. Right. We've got quite a few people coming on in, so I'll give it like a minute or two, Will, and then we'll get kicked off if that sounds good.
Great.
All right. Perfect. Great. I want to keep as much time for us to focus on the content. So I think I'll go ahead and get us kicked off, and we'll continue. We'll catch people as they come in, if that sounds good. So first of all, thank you all for making some time to spend with us today for today's virtual leadership roundtable. I'd like to start by thanking our partner, FourOne Insights, and all of our panelists who have been working diligently to bring this programming to you. Couple of very quick housekeeping items as we get started. We're going to keep this very interactive, so feel free to either use the raise hand button or drop questions into the chat as we move along in the conversation. We'll go ahead and try to answer those as they happen. We'll also reserve some space at the end to have some final Q&A. So don't feel like you're missing out if you don't pop your question in during the content. Also, just a quick thing, we are recording this and we may use clips here and there in some of our promotions for events and things like that. So if you are at all uncomfortable being on camera in that way, feel free to not turn on your camera. You're always welcome to just use the chat function if that's more comfortable. And finally, I'd like to just take a quick moment and introduce our moderator and host today, Will Markow. Will has lived his entire life at the intersection of workforce data and real-world impact. He's an internationally recognized expert on the future of work. He's testified before Congress on growing the cybersecurity talent pipeline, and his research has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and CNBC. If you've ever used cyberseek.org, you've already benefited from his work. Spent 12 years at Lightcast building and leading their workforce research team, and he's founded FourOne Insights to do something that most firms don't. Actually equip us, educators, organizations, and communities with the data they need to prepare for where work is going, not where it's been. FourOne Insights brings deep subject matter expertise and world-class labor market data together in a way that makes abstract concrete. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and pass this on over to Will.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Heather, for the warm introduction. It is fantastic to be with you all today, and I'm so excited to be partnering with the Cyber Guild to bring this conversation to you all. And we're probably not at all surprised. Everybody is still talking about AI, even though we have been talking incessantly about this topic for the past few years. There's still a lot of unanswered questions about how it's actually going to be impacting our organizations and our workforces in the future. So today I'm thrilled to be joined by an all-star panel of experts who can provide their expertise on this topic. And before we dive in, I just want to give everybody an opportunity to briefly introduce themselves who's on the panel, because I know I will not do them justice. I would love for them to share their expertise with you all directly. So maybe just going in the order of the folks I see on my screen. Jesse, if you want to give a quick intro to yourself, then we can go through the rest.
Sure. Thank you, Will. I am Jessie Skibby. I've been a woman in cybersecurity for, 30 plus years now. Super proud about that. I am a principal security strategist in the office of the CISO at AWS. I'm also super proud to be a Cyber Guild Advisory Council member. And so I'm literally living this topic today in my daily life. So I'm very excited to continue the conversation with Will and this amazing panel.
Great. Thanks, Jesse. And Brad.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Brad Rumpf. I'm the field chief technology officer at a company called Tynes. We're empowering the world's most important companies and important workflows. Doing that in a way where we're helping organizations kind of bridge the gap between complex IT operations, security operations, and demands, and of course, human potential through agentic AI and intelligent workflows. So, pleasure to be here. Pleasure to join the other panelists, and looking forward to the conversation.
Great. And Yolanda.
Hello, all. I am Dr. Yolanda Reed. I have been doing cybersecurity for almost as long as Jesse. And I first started off in cybersecurity, working for the government, doing offensive cyber operations. And then I have moved on into industry, um, doing offensive, defensive, and tool development, and also looking into the future. And so, what does emerging tech like AI and quantum, how will that affect cybersecurity today and into the future? So, I'm very glad to be a part of this conversation.
Wonderful. Well, we are thrilled to have you all as part of this discussion as well. And I think that listeners are definitely going to
Can everyone,
be able. Oh, yeah.
are people able to hear me?
Yes. Who is this?
This is Dr. Jen Bloom. So sorry, I can't seem to access the Zoom meeting. It keeps telling me the passcode is incorrect. So I just thought I'd dial in.
Oh, no worries.
We
I
can
was
send
going
that
to mention
over
as
to
well.
you, Jen.
Great. Yeah.
Okay,
So
perfect.
Jen is also going to be joining us as a panelist. Sounds like there's some issue logging in, but Jen, if you want to give your quick introduction as well, that would be great.
Yeah, everyone, apologies for signing in late. So yeah, I'm Dr. Jen Bloom. I am currently the Director of AI with HII. I also have an LLC, Gen AI with a J. My focus is on all things new regarding artificial intelligence, including exploitation of it and how it can also be used to discover cyber vulnerabilities. I'm very excited to be here.
Great. We are excited to have you here as well. And it's not a webinar if you don't have at least one technical issue. So we'll get that fixed for you and get to see your face soon enough. But before we dive into the conversation, I really wanted to just kick things off by providing some context around what we're seeing across the workforce more broadly as it relates to AI and how it's starting to be integrated across the cybersecurity landscape and the impact that's having across teams. So I'll go ahead and pull up a few slides just to get us started. So let me know if this seems to be working for everybody. All right, I think they should be up now. So, as Heather mentioned in the introduction, what we really do at FourOne Insights is work to quantify every aspect of the workforce that we can, especially as it relates to how emerging technologies such as AI are impacting the workforce. And we use that information to help organizations try to unpack what they should be doing to prepare and future-proof themselves for these emerging technological shifts and the implications that they're going to have for their workforce. And personally, I've been analyzing both the cybersecurity workforce as well as other aspects of emerging technology and their impact on the workforce for close to 15 years. And in that time, we have never tracked a field that is evolving as rapidly as AI. For the vast majority of those 15 or so years, AI and related skills were actually in lower demand than many other emerging fields, such as cloud, such as data science, such as cybersecurity. But in just the past 2 or 3 years, demand has absolutely ballooned for AI. That's not terribly surprising, I'm sure, to many people, but I think the order of magnitude and the speed with which it has been adopted across the workforce is still truly staggering. And we now see that demand for AI-related skills is dramatically higher than many of those other fields that historically had grown even faster than AI before the advent of ChatGPT. And we now estimate that about 14% of traditional workflows across the entirety of the economy, not just cybersecurity, are already being either automated or augmented in some capacity using generative AI. Now, on the one hand, you might say that means the majority of work is still human, but on the other hand, I think that it is truly staggering just how rapidly a technology that is still, frankly, in its infancy has been adopted across such a large swath of the workforce. And this is certainly true within cybersecurity as well. This rapid evolution of AI and the integration of AI into different aspects of cybersecurity work is driving real shifts in terms of the skill requirements that we're seeing employers are asking for. In just the past 2 years alone, we've seen roughly a quarter of key skill requirements in cybersecurity jobs have shifted, and most of that is being driven by rapid growth in AI-related capabilities, such as generative AI and similar types of skills. And this is also bleeding over into the specific workflows that we're seeing across different cybersecurity teams. We mentioned that about 14% of all workflows across the economy have been impacted by AI in some capacity, but in cyber, we estimate it's even higher, close to 17 to 26% of traditional work is now being either automated or augmented by AI in some capacity. And for organizations, that's starting to lead to real opportunities for productivity gains on the order of between $10,000 to $30,000 per worker on average. Of course, you also have to figure out how to capture that value by integrating AI into the right workflows. And we're starting to see that many companies are struggling to figure out exactly how to do that, especially as the cost structure is still unclear for AI in the long term. And so we're finding that many organizations are starting to have to work a delicate balance between three specific factors when they're trying to figure out where to integrate AI into different workflows and across different use cases in their organization. The first is the value. What is the value that you're actually deriving from it? That one sounds pretty straightforward, but a lot of organizations, I think, have taken a very haphazard approach to just trying to throw AI at everything they possibly can and see what sticks. But increasingly, we're finding that organizations are having to be thoughtful and judicious about where they place their AI bets to maximize the value that they're getting them. But they also have to balance that value against the risk and complexity of integrating AI into different workflows, because it's not always going to be a good fit for different types of use cases across the organization, or it might introduce unanticipated risk or technical complexities that render the value not worth, essentially the juice isn't worth the squeeze in some of those cases. And so I think with that framing in mind, I'd really like to kick off the conversation by starting with a question for you, Jesse, because I know that both internally in the work you're doing at AWS, as well as the things that you're seeing with some of the other organizations that you're working with, you're really on the front lines of seeing how AI is being integrated into different cybersecurity operations and how organizations are starting to think about doing that. And so I'd love to just get your viewpoint on how you're starting to see AI be integrated into different security workflows, into different teams, and how organizations are really thinking about that from both a prioritization standpoint and from a implications for their workforce standpoint.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to talk about this. As I mentioned in my intro, I'm actually living this myself. And by living it, I'll tell you my day job has changed from I was a leader of leaders up until about August of last year. And then I moved over to an individual contributor role in the office of the CISO. And I have to tell you, it was super thrilling that I haven't written code in probably like 15 years, but I built my own app like a couple weeks ago. And things like Kiro that we have at AWS, and obviously it's a service and you can leverage it, but these agentic IDE environments that don't take necessarily skill in Gen AI or skill in coding, like anybody in a leadership role or anybody in an administrative role can use these tools. Like we just simply no longer have constraints that we had. And I say we, meaning I'm a business leader. I want to create an outcome. I'm not going to get six engineers to build something. I'm going to build it myself. Like that's the world we live in now. And that's how we have to start thinking. Because if we don't think like that, we're not going to push ourselves. Like it's the front line that really needs to start innovating more often without fear of failure. Like that's how we as leaders have to start influencing our people to think, because we simply just no longer have constraints that we had 6 to 12 months ago. And so I can tell you what we're doing. We have been doing this internally for, gosh, it feels like a couple of years now. It's like just evaluating every single output that we create and evaluating, do we have those constraints any longer? Like, should we be thinking differently about how we actually generate this customer value or generate this outcome in a completely different way? And at Amazon, we've had this very, I mean, publicly shared part of our day one culture is called working backwards. And like working backwards is working backwards from the outcome. And the how you do something changes, like the what you do for your customer doesn't change. But I think that's generally kind of from a mental model perspective, it's like the what you deliver is value, but the how you do that and how you do that across the organization, more of like a workflow or a work chart mentality versus an org chart, like with silos. Um, but I think you asked me specifically about like how it's being integrated in security workflows. And the other truth is that, you know, the cost of an attack has come down significantly, right? Like with AI tools, attackers are using AI to attack. And so we have to use AI to defend. And I think there are others on this conversation that will build upon what I'm saying. But it's really about how do we leverage it for like the most low-hanging fruit example would be like detection, response, and posture management. Like how are we actually leveraging it to triage and focus greater effort and less effort on actually triage for incidents? And so I think there's so many examples. Obviously, if you want more information about like AWS specific use cases, there's a lot out there right now on Amazon Bedrock and Agent Core and how even government agencies are leveraging this to meet compliance requirements, but also significantly reduce the amount of time they have to spend triaging alerts. So I'll pause there and let others build upon what I'm saying.
I I think, well, there was so much in there that we could pivot into different ways. But I will say that, I started off my career in offensive cyber. And so what I always give as a warning, right, is that sometimes we can put our trust too heavily into technology. And so while we do get an extreme value out of AI and what it can bring to us, once you start trusting it, uh, oops,
Don't throw your arms up in the air. It's like,
oh,
okay,
I
let's
think
see
we're
if we
getting a
can
little
mute.
bit of feedback from somebody. If you're not speaking, could you please mute your mic?
So, yes. And so once we start trusting, we should not let it go unmonitored, right? Because from an adversarial standpoint, that's where I would come. I would wait until you're not watching and I would take over. Or if you use for coding, right? If you I think the education needs to stay there because how do you know that you created good secure code when you had it automated? And so there's a lot of things that we can probably pivot off of that conversation if you would like to go those directions.
Yeah, we have no shortage of directions we can go in. Brad, I saw you came off mute, so it sounds like you might have a thought to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in terms of how we're seeing AI being integrated into security workflows, I think we're way past the evaluation phase, and not that companies aren't evaluating lots of different new technologies. This isn't we've been doing this for a couple of years now, and I think, when we look at when we look at workflows and how to best automate those. Sorry, I think we're picking up some background noise again.
non dis pas.
I'll keep talking. So, at times we really think about AI integration kind of on a spectrum. And I think from, deterministic automation and deterministic workflows to human in the loop, to fully agentic, right? And really being able to provide, security practitioners with the choice and the option. And, Jesse, I applaud you for, hey, been a long time since I've written anything or built an application. And, the pendulum has swung completely the other way, and I think what we've recognized is that the tooling has completely changed. We can build applications now through natural language interfaces, right? Even voice. And, I think that's a huge paradigm shift and really leveling the playing field. And so, I think really, we look at kind of the most mature teams kind of operating in the middle and, really in paying attention to governance, right? Before velocity, but we're seeing velocity at this amazing pace. And I deal with statistics all the time and just kind of looking at different white papers and things that we published. And, we talked to a bunch of over 1,800 security leaders and found that virtually every SOC has adopted AI and in some way, shape, or form. And so, the conversation and the real conversation now is depth, not adoption and how it's actually being used. And if you're running agentic, workflows or just using AI kind of as a better search tool. And I think, we're seeing companies in varying different degrees of maturation in terms of, how that's playing out.
I'd be curious to maybe double click on that because it sounds like through some of the work you've seen, there are different gradations of maturity in terms of how AI is being integrated into their operations. And I'm curious, for people who are listening in, are there any best practices that you're starting to see bubble up that the more mature organizations are doing as opposed to those that maybe are earlier on in their adoption journey?
I'd like to hop in on that, Will, if that's all
Sure,
right. So,
please.
one thing I've seen, I don't know if I don't want to sound, I don't want to offend anybody by saying more immature company. I'll say less mature companies. What I found that they do is they start with the tool first and then they build around it, which to me is a huge error, right? They're just like, oh, should we do ChatGPT or maybe we should do Perplexity or maybe we should do Copilot when they really should be uh, checking out their workflows first and designing that in full and then looking at the tools. So by the time they figure it out, oh, maybe this isn't the best tool to use, they're already kind of baked in. They've already spent a bunch of money. So that's just something I found from my experience.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I've seen this not just with AI, but with many other tools. I usually describe it as organizations that are, buying Teslas for toddlers. It's, going to sound great, look great on paper. It's going to cost a lot of money, and it's just going to sit in the garage collecting dust until people actually learn how to drive it. And I think that is what has happened with a lot of organizations with AI as well. So, Brad, I'm curious if there's anything from the research that you would add to that as well, from some of the things you've seen in terms of best practices, or Yolanda and Jesse as well.
I mean, it's 100%, falls on really, finding really what the top AI driven use cases are, and if we look at a lot of use cases that are already in production today, alert triage and enrichment, phishing analysis, vulnerability prioritization, identity lifecycle automation, threat intelligence correlation, right? And really kind of starting there and then looking at how, you can apply AI to start solving some of these problems. And a lot of these workflows, a lot of them are already, deterministic, and they're kind of thought out. And I think, where we're really seeing kind of AI shine and being introduced into these workflows is we know AI is really good at reading and summarization and ingesting raw information and payloads and then producing something that's much more structured, right? With the severity, affected users, host names, even kind of briefs. And we also know that AI is really good at enriching this information in parallel and pulling context from different tools simultaneously and really doing that very, very quickly. And then lastly, we see AI really, providing a tremendous amount of benefit for these use cases and investigating and documenting, right? And so writing full investigation reports with mappings, maybe to something even like MITRE, doing verdict and confidence level and prioritized kind of response, actions. And so it's really freeing up and like we like to say, taking the muck work, out of a lot of this work that, has historically required a lot of manual, right, intervention. And so, we're really seeing tremendous productivity gains with AI being applied in these different use cases.
I wanted to add on to mature and immature, or at least mature organizations, and take it from more of an academic standpoint. Is that before AI arrived, we knew that it was coming, and then there was all of this research done of, what is the best way to implement AI and what's the use cases and things like that. And then it showed up, and we ignored all of it, I think. And there are so many lessons that we could have taken from cloud adoption, and then also from just cybersecurity practices. And one thing that, going off to what Dr. Bloom said about, bringing in AI and then figuring it out later, is that most organizations don't know what AI that they have going on in their environment. A lot of places think they might have a clue of things, but there's a lot of things that is going on and is running like between the tools and the applications and then the website. I mean, there's just a lot of AI that no one's owning it. Right. And so if you're an organization that you don't have someone that owns it and is developing policies for it, you have a very terrible situation that you're going to have to work through, and it's going to take a lot of time to do. And we've learned this before, right? With cloud adoption, we didn't want to run every analytic in the cloud because it was expensive. AI is expensive. And so I think we're going to talk about that a little later today as well. But setting up a governance structure, setting up who makes decisions, who says yes, who says no, is very important for an organization. And if your organization, your company, and your agency is not in that, that is something that's very important that you should get a hold of sooner than later.
Can I just add one more thing to that? Because one thing I want to
Please.
say is the difference that I've seen between the more mature as far as AI adoption and the ones that are going a lot slower. It's kind of simple. It's like a people alignment problem. And I do spend a lot of time talking to CISOs at some of our largest customers. And if the CISO is not part of the AI adoption journey, if they're not right there standing shoulder to shoulder with the CTO and the CIO and really thinking about how can their security team help increase adoption, increase innovation across the enterprise. And speaking of the governance aspect, if they're not early in saying, here are the guardrails that we're going to place in that
Mhm.
agentic IDE environment, right? Because you can do that now. And I think it's about joining these leaders together and doing it together. Like it's so simple. But if the security team isn't thinking innovative, if they're just standing there saying, no, let's not do this, right? We just don't live in that world anymore. We have to partner, and we have to think innovatively from a security leadership perspective. That's the difference that I usually see in companies that are really having a hard time and companies that are going fast.
Can I piggyback on the piggyback
Please
really quick?
Yes.
piggyback
So,
away.
so I've noticed that some companies, like Jesse described, they do have governance boards, but like she mentioned, they're too late in the game and they're so scared that the governance is actually a huge restriction. And I've seen that in companies where there is no enablement of AI. They're so scared that nothing gets done. Nobody's really free to come up with new ideas because they're like, well, this might be a security issue, and so it actually becomes a huge like stoppage.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is one of the challenges I've seen a lot of organizations run into as well is how do you balance those two competing priorities? On the one hand, you need strong governance and guardrails in place to make sure you don't introduce unwarranted risk, but on the other hand, there's a need to innovate. And so I'm curious, what any of you have seen in terms of best practices for trying to strike that balance. Are there certain guardrails or mindset shifts or just internal cultures that you have seen really seem to be most effective at helping leaders and the rest of the organization strike that balance between both the need to move fast and innovate while also having strong guardrails and governance in place to ensure that you don't do anything that is going to lead to unanticipated consequences. So curious if any of you have a point of view on some of the best practices you've seen.
I I know I was on a call with a company that was in Europe, and they took a very, very strong approach to securing AI or striking the balance. And so they looked first at their data, which I think is a very important step. And they put boundaries around this data can only be used in this boundary. And these are the tools that are approved that you can use in this boundaries. And these are the guardrails that you can do. And then they had a review process to assess over time, is this too restrictive or can we take more risk in it? And I thought it was an interesting approach. I asked for a white paper that they were writing about it because maybe that is it. We're so new and we're going to learn along the way. And so striking the perfect balance, I think we're going to grow into it before we figured it out. And I don't think that's a bad thing. We did the same thing with cloud, right? And we had to strike a balance with that. And we've done it for other technologies as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it sounds like they built a more adaptive approach to their governance structure so that it wasn't just one and done.
Yes.
Here's the rigid rules you must adhere to, but it's let's have an adaptive process that is dynamic and evolves over time.
And they had a chief AI officer that partnered, like Jesse was saying, with the CIO and the CTO on a very regular basis. And so it was very collaborative, um, restrictive, but with boundaries and adaptive.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it makes me think about, when we have these organizations now that really have to think in terms of how do you become as adaptive as possible? How do you increase your dynamism because things are moving so fast? That places a lot of strain on the workforce as well, because that means they have to constantly adapt either to new regulations or new governance standards, or there just might be new skills they need to learn as technology is evolving. And so I'd be curious to know from you all, what are some of the specific changes you're seeing in terms of the skill sets that people need either today based upon the new technologies that are coming down the pipeline related to AI, or just in terms of the foundational capabilities that might help to make them more adaptive in the future. So, Jen, I saw you jumped in,
Yes.
so
Yes,
love to hear your thoughts.
I was so excited about this because I was very fortunate enough to present to some students at VSU who are about to enter the workforce, right? So they're about to graduate. And so they were so terrified. They said, are there going to be jobs for us? Because isn't AI replacing a lot of jobs we would normally get? And what I wanted to shift their mindset to being is that companies are hiring people who know how to use AI. And so one thing I thought, well, to answer the original question is, you need to start this mindset early on if possible. But they didn't realize that AI was a skill in terms of like prompting or learning about kind of how it works or even getting creative with it because they were so scared. And a lot of universities, prevent them from using it because there's potential for cheating and fraud and all that stuff to the point where they didn't want to use it in their personal lives. And so one thing I was telling them was use it to do something and make it like a portfolio and put it up there so that when jobs are looking at you, you have this wonder, if I was a chef, I wouldn't just go up to someone and say, I'm an excellent chef without you sampling like anything I made. So this to me is for the early, entry to the workforce. That's a mindset shift is that they're not being replaced. This is another tool for you to learn.
Yeah, I can jump in there. And I think, we talk a lot about, we're seeing this movement from syntax skills and knowing, a particular language or how to write scripts and, these technical skills to, really logic and context skills and really knowing how, say, a business process should flow. Over the last couple of years, we've seen this emergence of like the forward deployed engineer. And, depending on your technical prowess, it can mean a lot of different things. And I think we're seeing people that don't necessarily have, super technical skill set, but can really understand the business and think about things critically. And I think it's the critical, thinking part that's probably one of the most valuable skills in this AI driven world. Where really you can kind of verify, right? Like what the AI outputs are and really understanding, the why of how something's happening. And that allows you to really kind of iterate. I was just on a call the other day with a CTO that within a very large Fortune 50 company. And, they've been building things out deterministically for years, and now they've really swung the pendulum and they're really, pressure testing how much of this they can do through natural language. And again, that takes into consideration these critical thinking skills and, the context. And, we kind of, in working with this team, it's a very large team, but like the skill sets are across the board. You have very technical, highly skilled engineers, and then you have folks that are, really, more astute kind of within the business domain. And I think overall, we're seeing organizations kind of embed kind of these AI champions in the business to help, really think through, what types of work that they could help them automate, how to make them more efficient. And again, it moves from, again, the syntax skills to really understanding just kind of the logic and the context of what you're trying to do.
So I think the workforce needs to continue to learn, right? So you learn in school and then you add AI to it and it becomes a partnership. And so I use AI every day, right? I love AI. I think there's a lot of people that are afraid of it. I get, you know, I give myself cookies for like teaching the elderly to use AI. Like, no, let's do this recipe and that kind of thing. And I think it's very, very helpful. But then I also want people to be mindful. It is a tool and it makes errors. And so you need to still know what you knew before there was AI to be able to do correction. And I correct AI. Like I was doing a CV at one point and I was like, oh, I haven't updated my CV in 20 years. And then it gave me back something that was a resume. I had to tell. I was like, this is more in line with the resume. This is not a CV. This would never get me another job as a professor. And I was training and I was like, okay, we're writing a letter to the developers. They need to know this. And so we still need to have knowledge. And as we are using AI and as we're developing AI, we also need to, in the same vein, be able to give it feedback. And I know that you have to have knowledge to be able to give feedback. That's like how you're using it and where it's going wrong. And I noticed I was ordering food. I love food. And there was an error that Uber Eats made. And I went to go give it feedback. And when did you know? They said, no, we're not taking feedback from customers, only from the restaurants. And I was like, that's a fatal error to the company. And that's a fatal error to the deliverer because I noticed an error with the accounting. And so they were both losing money. So I did take time to write a letter the old-fashioned way because we still need to continue to train and we have to have knowledge to be able to say, what do we want these tools to do for us?
Can I just, sorry,
Go
can I
ahead.
just add, you gotta jump in with this group, right? I have a daughter entering as a college freshman this coming fall. And so I think deeply about this because like the floor is rising, right? Like with skill sets, meaning if you're truly leveraging AI to do a lot of the repetitive tasks, you don't really need entry level people to do certain work. So the floor is rising, the ceiling can also rise, but like from an economic standpoint, like we need people that can come up to speed very, very quickly to be subject matter experts in whatever they're responsible for, because the shifting is from, human in the loop to human on the loop. Like, how are they actually monitoring? How are they trusting what AI is doing? How are they using critical thinking and decision making skills and empathy and background and knowledge? So, if I was interviewing a brand new candidate, I would look for behavioral techniques such as critical thinking skill. Are you early to adopt new technology? How are you staying up to speed with like learning new skills? And like some of these very behavioral driven skills are never going to go away because we still need people for that critical decision making and thinking and strategic and empathy, things that AI will never do. And so I'm thinking about my daughter's going to kill it when she graduates college because she already has a lot of those things. But as long as she can continue that adaptability to continue to learn and like reshape herself over time, I mean, humans are still going to be needed for work for probably the remainder of time. We just have to figure out how we place them differently in the workflow.
Yeah, I think is a really interesting discussion point because it sounds like a lot of what you're saying is that, we need critical thinkers, we need people who know what good looks like or can figure out what good looks like. And it's, less about having some of those rote technical skill sets and more about being able to thoughtfully guide AI towards what good is. It takes time to build up that context. And it's a lot easier for somebody who's been in the field for 10 plus years to be able to know what good looks like as opposed to someone who's fresh out of college. But if we only over-index on hiring for some of those experienced workers, which I think a lot of people are worried we might end up doing, that means that you might save a few dollars today, but it's going to absolutely collapse our long-term talent pipeline. We're not going to have the next generation of experienced workers coming up through the ranks, and that's going to lead to some long-term talent challenges. And so I'd love to get thoughts from the group on how we try to solve that chicken and egg problem to ensure that we're still getting as much out of AI today as we can, while still investing in the next generation of workers who we're going to have to pass the torch to in a few years to help ensure that we continue to get as much out of AI once they come up through the ranks. And so maybe, Jen, I know that you had talked a little bit about some of the things you're seeing in the student space and the early career space. Be curious to know if you have any thoughts on this to kick things off, but certainly if anybody else has thoughts, feel free to jump in as well.
Sorry, I was looking at some of the chat questions on the side.
Oh,
So
no
I was
worries.
thinking about the answers. Could you please repeat what
Yeah,
the
no
topic
worries.
is?
I was just mentioning, how there's kind of this chicken and egg problem
Mm,
in the field where if we're saying that you need experience to really get the most out of AI,
mm,
then we're not going to be bringing up the next generation of workers and helping them get experience so that, we
mm,
have more experienced folks who are using the tools today. But then if we don't invest in the next generation of
mm.
workers to build that experience, then we're not going to have enough folks a few years down the line. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how we try to solve that chicken and egg problem.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for restating that. In true millennial fashion, I tried to multitask and failed at both. So, but so one thing that I've noticed, at least with I guess the more experienced, let me try, I need to think about this. So I guess one thing that I to pick you to restate what you've already said, one thing I've noticed is with AI in particular, it is doing things at such a fast rate and looking through all this data and coming up with all of these like outputs and research. There aren't enough actual people to review it all to make sure that it's actually accurate in this sense. So yes, it's more important now than ever to make sure that the younger generation gets that experience. But I found that culturally, inspiration is really what does the best because a lot of the younger generation are very downhearted or downtrodden. They're just like, what's the next generation is off. I'm not saying it's all doom and gloom, but they're like, what's the point? How can we possibly compete? Not realizing that the AI tools of today are vastly going to change by the time they're probably in the workforce. So even as experienced as you are, like say you're 20 years in the field, at some point, you're just like, I don't know how much. I hope everyone always learns, but you're just like, I don't know. Like I don't know how much I can possibly do. Case in point, I have a friend who has a T-shirt that says, "I cannot learn one more device," because we were children of the 80s, so we went from like records to 8-track to cassette, and she's like, "Do you know how many songs?" The same song I have on just different things now. And at some point, I'm just going to reach a point, like, I'm just going to be like, I can't learn anything anymore. But all that to say is, I think I think the younger generation needs to have a definite mind shift, as do we, in terms of getting the experience. They can get that experience as they're growing up. Like I've gotten baby books for my friends who have just had kids. It's just like this is how you learn quantum. It's a picture book for infants, right? But it teaches quantum, and I think that's amazing. So while they won't necessarily put, I have this many as experience at a 16-year-old, I have 16 years worth of experience. I think if we gave them some sort of, test or, just talking with them, it would come through. So on our end, we need to be like years of experience probably doesn't matter as much as true understanding. So that's a very long-winded way. for that.
And
And
I would
Jesse, I
say,
saw you came. Oh, sorry.
oh,
Go ahead,
no, go,
Yolanda.
Jesse. We always jump in front of Jesse.
I'm
Go,
sorry. I
Jesse.
was just going to say, first of all, I don't necessarily think it's just an early career problem. I think that everyone needs to be learning. And I know I did a couple of talks like at reInvent and Reinforce about psychological safety. And like one of the core foundational elements of psychological safety is feeling safe to learn. And I think we talk about this from an AWS like security leadership perspective. We need to live it for other people to see it. And if I'm demonstrating vulnerability in my own learning, if I'm creating a safe space for others to learn around me, like we can't forget about those core foundational elements. And I think there's definitely lots of room for tools and accelerated learning paths and like bringing people up to speed very, very quickly. But there's also like how we as leaders show other people that it's safe to learn. It's safe to ask questions. It's safe to not know all the answers. We're all learning together. We're all experimenting. Like if you're experimenting with an AI use case and you fail 6 times, that's so much better than never trying. And I just think that's something we can't forget because we have to create that safety for early career individuals feeling safe to experiment and try things that I never thought of, right? That's the whole value of having diversity, and that leads to innovation because somebody coming in is going to have an idea that I never thought of. And we just have to create that safe environment, is what I want to add.
And I wanted to add, we've had other problems before. So like offensive cyber, I mean, if you're like, I want to be a hacker, I want to be a legal hacker. Entry level is like 8 years of experience. And so to be able to gain that, I would give advice of, there's a lot of things online that you can practice. You can start doing these different types of activities like capture the flag. I used to give drills that they can show, make a portfolio and put in GitHub that they can bring to interviews. And then also, then there's volunteer stuff that you can do. So not for hacking, but like for, general like IT or cybersecurity, I would say go volunteer at a local church. They always need help. So there's different ways of getting experiences. And I think we shouldn't forget that to be creative and getting those experiences because you are going to need them later. And we might need those experiences a little bit more than we have in the past, but we can be very creative in how we get there.
Is it okay to jump in with a question?
Sure.
Hi.
Please.
Thank you, Dr. Reed. So kind of going off of your point, I think one of the challenges myself, and I'm also an elder millennial, so I hear the getting distracted by an email while listening to a call. One of the challenges that I've been thinking a lot lately is, when I train junior staff, traditionally a lot of it is like, they do it themselves and that's how they learn what good looks like. But once you have AI, it almost feels like those opportunities to have them really get in the weeds and do these things themselves that build that skill set sort of disappears. I'm starting to feel a little bit like my elementary school teacher who didn't want us using calculators. But I was just wondering if folks on the call had any recent experiences of maybe how they adapted the way they train staff or the way they're thinking about training staff, given AI adoption in their companies. Because I want them to use AI. I'm just trying to figure out how to give them the best of both worlds, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
For me,
Oh,
trust but verify came to mind
yeah.
because like it's just what we do. And I think like they have to understand the flow of the data. Where does it come from? How is it being manipulated? Potentially training them that you can leverage different LLMs or different AI tools to check and balance each other. Like they have to know what's going on under the hood. And that's the kind of the trust but verify model. And I think that just mental model has to be ingrained in anyone who's building an AI solution. Like, how do you really know that the answer is the answer if you can't trace it back to how it was actually calculated?
Yeah. I agree with that. I kept five, and when I was at IBM, I kept five different AI models and agents up, and they gave different answers. And then there's a value in finding what was similar and what was different, and then being able to talk and figure out and investigate and talk to experienced people about where those differences is. That's that critical thinking, right? And so is doing things in a different order, but you still want to be able to, there's still ways to train them. And so some things are good at certain tasks than others, and then finding the discrepancy in between, there's a lot of value in that.
Thank you.
Right. So we have about 10 minutes left in our time. So I think this would actually be a great moment to open it up more broadly for any audience questions. Feel free to either add something in the chat or raise your hand if you would like to ask it directly of the folks on the panel today. But I think I already saw one or two in the chat, one of which was related to how AI is impacting GRC and privacy. And so I'd love to just open that up to the group, see if you have any thoughts about how AI is specifically impacting either cyber GRC or the privacy components of the field.
So I would say that AI AI is kind of making GRC more important than ever. I know I've been reviewing. The EU has an AI like Privacy Act and all these different policies, and I know NIST has quite a few as well. But I do think that we are a bit behind, especially I guess in legal terms as well. I've seen companies be like, what is this defined as? And there is no precedent. And so they're just like, ugh, I'm not sure. In terms of privacy, I have seen AI companies start to take that very seriously. Like Anthropic, for example, they just started putting out their sandboxes, right? So now you can have things like on premise. You don't have to have it touch anything. So it seems like they are very much aware that this is a concern.
Think we're also seeing kind of the emergence of AI. It's a new category of risk like within GRC, and we spent a lot of time talking about not only shadow AI but shadow agents, and then agentic AI kind of as an attack surface. And so there's a lot of folks and a lot of enterprises that are using AI that's not sanctioned. And I even know, and a lot of folks that fall into this category, other peers of mine and colleagues of mine that might favor one frontier model over another, or one set of LLMs or tooling for that perspective that isn't necessarily being provided by their companies. And so, I think when you really look at that, it's a whole new level of risk of what data people are taking from within the enterprise and putting it in places maybe where it shouldn't belong. And that's really, a huge topic of conversation right now, and top of mind for a lot of folks, both in the security and kind of IT organizations within companies that are responsible for typically, rolling out, these types of technologies.
I'll also add one more thing that I thought about regarding AI privacy is that some companies and some tools that are coming out, I guess I should say, care less about privacy. So for example, I've recently been playing with a tool called Granola AI, like like the food granola. So it's a botless note taker, right? So it gets installed either on your computer or a device, and it uses the audio from that, right? So you can join a virtual meeting and no one knows that they are being recorded. And it also works on phones as well. So with a phone call. Now, the company gets around this by saying, it's up to you to say, are you comfortable with this? But my first thought was, oh, like this could really go wrong in a lot of ways, especially with one party consent, two party consent states. But on the positive side, I was like, this would be great if I was like recruiting, or I was on the looking for a job and on the recruiting side, and I have all these recruiters I'm talking to. I would love to have a note taker, but I also don't know where those recruiters are located, so I don't know if I'm committing a crime. So anyway, but that's just one example I have of a company that is in that gray space.
Yeah, got it. And I see a hand raised. Let's see. Yet and now yet. Did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Hi everyone. Thank you very much for this. My name is Ethanayet. I am a network engineer. I don't know how I ended up on a webinar with a lot of cybersecurity professionals, but I'm happy. I have a question. I'm not sure if it's related to this webinar. Everyone is talking AI will replace every job, every tech job. How do you guys think about AI replacing network engineering? I believe it doesn't, but I would like to hear from you guys. Thank you.
I would say, just jumping in, I don't think about it replacing the need to have a network engineer, but I would look deeply at the day-to-day tasks that you're doing as a network engineer and look for ways to create efficiencies. Because that doing more with less mentality is what every leader, regardless of where they are in the organization, right? Every leader within the organization is driven to create efficiencies with AI. And so there's nobody better than a network engineer who's first line looking at their daily work and thinking differently. Like I mentioned earlier, imagine your world that you don't have constraints that you had 6 to 12 months ago. How would you do your work differently? And how could you leverage AI to do that work differently and safely? I don't know if
And
that's helpful.
and and how can if you used AI to what does that free you up to do that you couldn't do before, right? Because you were always restrained because you ran out of time. And so now if you were to gain more time, what would you use that time for? Because AI has helped you.
Yeah, for all the doom and gloom news out there on AI, cutting jobs and, impacting entry level folks, I think this just came out within the last 24 hours. I happened to catch it. I think I was looking at Google stock price for some reason, and I saw like an article that, Sir Demi, Habissis, who's, the founder of DeepMind at Google, and came out and completely dismissed this narrative of AI driven mass layoffs. And I'll quote it, and he said, "This is dumb." you know and I was like, okay, this is positive. I like seeing this versus all this other doom and gloom news. And he acknowledged that, hey, while AI can significantly increase worker productivity, he really argues that, hey, companies should reinvest all these efficiency gains into building new products rather than cutting headcount. And for me, that was a breath of fresh air. And so I just thought I'd share it with the team. And then maybe unrelated, and it was brought up earlier, and I forget who made the comment. I don't know if it was Maria, about using calculators, but I was actually talking to I was at a happy hour last night. I'm out traveling. I'm in the Bay Area, and I was talking with a very seasoned account executive that's been in the AI space, in the cyber space. And he just finished like a whole interview loop with Anthropic. And he's like, I got all the way to the end and I didn't get it. And I said, well, how did you find it? And I have some friends that are at Anthropic, but, I asked him, how did you, as an account exec, like what was, how was the process? And he goes, Brad, he goes, they specifically stated that I'm not to use AI on any of these questions that I have to answer. And again, that kind of goes back to the critical thinking. So, the comment about not using calculators in math class, which I can deeply resonates with me. But I think, here we are where one of the leading, companies that's out there is, in their interview process, dissuading folks from actually using AI, depending on, the role, I'm sure, but kind of an interesting tidbit.
One thing I'll also add, Brad, is that there are new jobs that are going to be created because of AI,
Yes.
right? So
Yeah.
to me, it's going to be probably broken up into maybe three categories. So to me, it's going to be like the people who build AI, the people who are going to govern it, and then the people who are going to help other people learn AI. And so I think it's going to be great. You're going to have things like AI governance manager. I mean, Dr. Reed said, there's now chief AI officer. I was like, that sounds awesome. Like, I want that job. Like, an AI privacy specialist. I'm so excited. Like, just on the positive side of things, what jobs are going to stop popping up because of this.
100%. It's the same motion we saw with SaaS and cloud and ML and every other major thing.
And
We're seeing,
computers. I was going
yeah,
to say
computers.
computers were supposed to take over everything, you remember?
Yeah.
And look, it created all these other fields.
And then there's also fields that we or specialties that we forget about that are going to need to expand so drastically. When you're scaling up, when you have an API and it's going from maybe 100 companies accessing it to thousands and thousands of AI agents trying to access it, right? Like that human touch becomes even more critical, I think. So yeah, it should be interesting.
Yeah,
So I mean,
absolutely.
so
Well,
some I
oh,
was gonna say
sorry to jump in, Yolanda. I just wanted to say I realized that we are at time, and so for anybody who has to drop, completely understand. But Yolanda, I'll give you a last word if you want to jump in with the thought there.
I was gonna say um we used to have vacuum tubes, right? This is the EE background. We used to have vacuum tubes and they used to go in the back of the TV. And yes, we don't have those technicians anymore, but look at all that we gained after. And so don't be afraid of AI is what I was going to say.
I think that is a fantastic way to wrap this up. And just want to thank everybody who joined today for being part of the conversation. And most importantly, want to thank our fantastic panelists who added their insights and their expertise. It was really a great discussion. So glad that you were able to join us. And I am sure that it's going to be made available. Heather, if you're still on, feel free to keep me honest in sharing where it will be made available or when. But please, join me in thanking our wonderful group of panelists for a truly fantastic and engaging discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you. And everyone who did attend and who registered and couldn't attend will all receive an email with the recording. And we appreciate everyone's participation today and look forward to seeing you on future virtual leadership roundtables.
Sounds
Thanks,
great.
everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Have a good
Thanks,
one.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a
Bye.
nice day.